Attention, listeners. Do you ever find yourself struggling to decide what to watch on a Saturday night when you're in the mood for horror? Or perhaps you're trying to round out your own horror film education. In either case, I'm sure you'll be able to make some great discoveries in my 10 by 10 horror watch list, featuring a breakdown of the 10 favorite horror movies from 10 renowned horror directors. We did a deep dive of the favorite horror movies from directors including Guillermo del Toro, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Quentin Tarantino, James Gunn, Rob Zombie, Martin Scorsese, and many, many more. Here you'll find a collection of each director's favorite horror movies, along with quotes about what they appreciated about the films, all in an easy-to-reference PDF that you can download absolutely free. Featuring a mix of well-worn classics and deep cuts, hopefully you'll discover some overlooked gems and look at old classics through new lenses. Download the 10 by 10 horror watch list for free by visiting nicktaylor.com/horror guide. That's nicktaylor.com/horror guide. One last thing before we begin, and this is my email newsletter, The Howl. The Howl is a monthly rundown of the latest horror news along with my hand-picked movie recommendations, updates from the show, and cool stuff I've recently discovered, all in one quick read email delivered to your inbox only once a month. Easy to read, easy to sign up for, and easy to cancel. Join the Howl newsletter by visiting nicktaylor.com/thehowl. That's nicktaylor.com/thehowl. Welcome back to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. As always, each episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show explores how today's horror filmmakers are getting their movies made while deconstructing their methods and career strategies into practical insights that you can use on your own horror filmmaking journey. This includes creative processes, funding resources, favorite books and tools, key life lessons, and much, much more. Carter Smith is a writer, director, and photographer who has directed such movies as The Ruins, Midnight Kiss, and most recently, Swallowed. Swallowed is an independent body horror film about two friends who find themselves swallowed up in a drug smuggling operation where they have to ingest drug-filled sacs and thus trigger a chain of horrific events. This is actually my second interview with Carter, so if you're interested in his director origin story, including his work with Paramount and Blumhouse, definitely go check out episode 34. In this interview, we cover the making of Swallowed, the benefits of working with a lower budget and smaller crew, and how to puppeteer monstrous worms. All of this and so much more on this episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Now please give it up for Carter Smith.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always kind of been fascinated with body horror, and I think that there's something. I mean, the type of horror that I tend to gravitate towards is horror that is kind of based in reality and sort of is maybe a half a step away from something that could actually happen. Like I find that sort of horror much more terrifying than, you know, an alien or a demon or, you know, like to me, I mean, it is always more frightening if it could be possible or if it's, you know, almost possible. So, you know, I love the idea of doing something that took place in the same sort of universe as Bug Rush. Mm-hmm. I'm calling it like basically it's like backwoods Maine. Like it's not a cinematic universe. It's like, you know, small town backwoods Maine.
Right.
And, you know, and from the beginning, from the very first sort of birth of the script, I wanted to write something that was something that I could just go out and make with a bunch of friends on my own if I had to. If we couldn't get financing, if we couldn't get, you know, sort of all the the pieces to do sort of a bigger project. You know, I wanted to do something that was impossible. That was possible. Mm-hmm. And you know, body horror, like it, you know, this particular story, like it didn't require any, you know, over the top special effects, or sort of the stuff that the story called for was pretty manageable. Like I had gone down a YouTube rabbit hole actually of this Japanese craft program where it was like, those little straws that have the bendable top
straws.
Yeah. So like there's this craft video where they make a worm out of that.
Oh, that's cool.
And so like I spent hours like making this worm and then like painting it in latex and like just kind of playing around with. I was like, okay, even if I like don't get like a proper special effects, person to work with, like I could probably make this worm work in a shot or two if I needed to. So it was all based on what was possible.
Oh, that's really cool. Did you end up fabricating the worms yourself, or did you worked with them?
No.
Yeah, special effects.
Luckily, I did not have to make those worms myself.
Okay, I was going to say they looked amazing. I was very impressed.
As passionate as I was about that YouTube rabbit hole, it was not like they were not nearly as good as what Dan Martin was able to do for me. He is a much better special effects artist than me and my YouTube.
Well, the idea of getting high off of these animals, was that based on Sonoran toad venom?
Based on what?
I guess not, but Sonoran toad venom. It's these toads that create DMT.
I mean, not specifically.
Okay.
But like sort of in general, the idea that like, whether it's toad venom or, mescaline or some sort of plant or some like, the idea that it comes from the natural world and, it is something that is possible. Like that was very much, the starting point for it, for sure. And I mean, it also like takes, they are the bugs from Bug Crush.
Oh yeah. Right.
And it's sort of 10 years later and, Mark Patton has figured out how to monetize these bugs in a way. That was the starting point. It was like, okay, like what would happen 10 years later if someone like Rich, Mark's character, had sort of, made it into a business.
Yeah, I want to get back to Mark Patton for sure, because it was really nice to see him again. And he was a rare treat in this movie. But I remember in another interview, you were talking about how you had gotten to just a point of frustration where there was a number of projects. You've done movies for very major companies like Blumhouse, as well as DreamWorks. And it sounds like you were just basically trying to get things made and things were stuck and you just were dying to get something made. And just through frustration, you ended up writing a movie that is a lower budgeted movie than your last couple of movies, which
for sure.
From everything I've heard, that's always discouraged. And I think it's a shame. And it's discouraged with managers and agents like, no, you got to keep upping your budget. If you did $500,000, now you got to do a $1 million. Do $1 million, do it. You never go backwards. And I feel like that kills so many potential projects, and it makes people's careers essentially come to a screeching halt. I know they're well intentioned, but at the same time,
I mean, on the one hand, it makes sense. And I will say that I wasn't getting any of that from my agent.
Oh well, that's good.
But it did come from frustration at how difficult it is to get films put together and financed and cast in a way that it makes sense, to sell them today. And it films are expensive, and, to check all the boxes, you sort of have to, there's a lot of sort of opinions you have to service, and there's a lot of boxes you have to check. And I had just spent so long developing stuff. And then, when a certain actor wouldn't become attached, it would, sort of get stalled.
Yeah.
Or, it would just be like this, it felt like a never ending process of just, of sort of trying really hard to get stuff up off the ground and then just having it fall apart for one reason or another. And then, I think that listening, realistically, like listening to podcasts and listening to people like, Toby and John Adams and, sort of all of these different people that were making films in a way that, just felt like completely fresh and fascinating to me. I was like, well, fuck, like I have made these movies. I have worked with these bigger studios, and I know how to make movies and tell stories, like there's no reason why I shouldn't be doing it, at this much smaller level. As an experiment. Like in a lot of ways, Swallowed is kind of like my first film. Like, I think that it kind of, it's the first film that I imagined would be my first film,
right.
which wasn't meant to be, but like it is 100% like the weird little guerrilla style micro budget movie that I always thought would be the types of movies that I made. And so from the beginning, it was, I wrote the script 100% knowing what I had access to.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I've got, this cabin in the woods that, my dad built as an off the grid fishing camp. Like that's a cabin. I was like, okay, I've got that. I've got like a white Jeep. That's the car that I drive. So like, Jenna Malone's character Alice, she drives a white Jeep. Like, it was very much like I put all of those
Rodriguez style.
Yeah. Like I put all of those things on cards and had them in front of me the whole time I was writing the script. And like every time I would start to veer off and like, we're at a police station or like we're at no, I don't have a police station. I don't have a hospital. Like I need a border, crossing, and that is unavoidable, but that's kind of the one location that, was one that I didn't already have access to when I wrote the script.
Makes sense.
And it was kind of freeing. That the process, approaching the process like that was, it was amazing because there wasn't any, it was a story that was created for the resources, and the size production that, we ended up with.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there is some liberation when you have constraints instead of having infinite potentials. It's like you're limited to having, limitations. I think it forces you to almost be more creative. It's paradoxical, but it's totally.
Yeah. Well, then it forces you to, it forced me to focus on character rather than set pieces or, because at the end of the day, like, what's happening between these characters and the dynamics and the relationships and that stuff is the interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Not, explosions or any, big stunt gags,
Right. So how did it come together? How were you essentially off and running once you knew that you wanted to do something lower budget? How did you bring the crew together, bring the financing together? How did it all get made?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wrote the script and, it was the process of actually writing it happened pretty fast. And then we started to take it out to financiers and to sort of see what we could get. And we weren't looking for a lot, but we just kept running up against like, oh, I really like the script, but why don't you bring it back when it's a finished movie? And just like again and again heard that from people. And, it wasn't until, I had all of the actors in place and, for our shoot time that we had. And, there was one piece of financing that we thought was going to come in and it was, it was down to the wire and it didn't come in. And, there was this moment when I had to decide like, okay, am I going to make this movie anyway and own it 100% and finance it myself, which, it was kind of intimidating, but also because the story had been written to be so small, like it wasn't impossible. So I ended up going that route and not taking any outside investment.
Oh, wow.
And, doing it 100% myself.
Wow.
Yeah. Which, with a crew of, only a couple of people and, luckily we ended up getting into the US in Progress program in Poland, which is for sort of partially finished American films. And so I was able to get visual effects from a Polish visual effects house, Fixa, who did an amazing job for free. I got my deliverables, also from them. Like, so I was able to kind of, put more money on the screen than what we actually had to shoot it.
Oh, wow. I had no idea about that Poland organization. That's pretty amazing. So you bring them an unfinished movie and they find ways to either, hook up with supplemental things like visual effects, color correction, I would assume, just basically post processes.
Yep. All of that post stuff. I mean, they've got composers who are, will work on score, like basically whatever, I think that it was 6 films or maybe 7 films that went there and all of us were looking for different things and every single film gets something. You all sort of get something from that program, and it's kind of an amazing opportunity. I mean, the film has to be, doesn't have to be almost finished, but like you need a really strong rough cut.
Yeah, they need to know it's going to be a real movie.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that organization called again?
U.S. in Progress, like U.S. United States in Progress, and it's in Wrocław, Poland.
U.S. in Progress. Okay, cool.
And it happens sort of along at the same time as the American Film Festival that happens there.
Gotcha.
It's like the little sidearm. It's great.
Very cool. So I think thematically there was a lot of really interesting things happening with the story. And obviously we talked about body horror, about the ideas of muling and things like that. Where I was looking for the metaphor, if there was one. And I feel like there's two different types of metaphors. There's like a blatant metaphor like this is symbolic of this. And then there's more of these kind of somatic metaphors that recreate feelings and like emotions. And I don't know, it felt like it came from like a personal place. So, and some people don't want to say what their movies, really mean and represent, to leave it up for interpretation, which I totally respect. But what was there any sort of a metaphorical personal meaning behind the overall story and characters?
I mean, I think that's the kind of stuff that I'm not thinking about when I'm writing.
Right.
But it comes into play usually more so either on set or when I'm in the edit room.
Okay.
That's this, I don't think in those terms necessarily. I sort of, and I think that stuff happens kind of naturally,
right,
without trying to put it in.
Subconscious.
Yeah, it's subconsciously. It makes it on the screen, and it's only sometimes only afterwards that it's like, oh, wait a second, like I've totally, I've said this without even thinking that I was saying that.
Right.
But with this, I mean, there was certainly an element of the sort of the queer horror of it all, and seeing characters that are sort of unapologetically queer in a genre film. Where they're not there to be the butt of the joke, and they're not there to be the first one killed, and they're not there, to be, a sort of secondary side character. Like there's something about having them at the center of this story that I found really interesting, and I think that in a lot of ways this is the movie that I really wished that I had found, in the video store when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Not only for like, the content, but like just the story, and seeing characters that are like Benjamin is 100% okay with himself and who he is. And, it is sort of, it's not about him struggling with his sexuality or, there's just, that's a part of who he is, but that's not necessarily what the story is about.
Right.
And I think that that's something that we've only like in the last couple of years gotten to the point where like, especially in genre films, like that's even possible.
Right. Where you have queer characters without the story being about their struggle with being queer or gay or whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like you answered this question, but I was going to ask, like, what is the difference between queer horror and horror movies that have queer characters? And I feel like you just kind of laid it out though, but if anything else comes to mind.
I mean, I think a lot of times horror that has queer characters is horror that is made by straight people,
right,
that are not queer, that might have an idea of what a queer character might be. I think that queer horror as a term, as new as it is maybe more tied to like the point of view or the the sort of the origin point of the writer or the director or the the person sort of telling the story.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It definitely makes a lot of sense.
I mean, because something like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is queer horror, and it was made by straight people, and it's I think that queer audiences have long sort of looked for whatever they can get out of the films that they love.
Yeah.
And you're able to extract subtext, in a way that you sort of had to, because there wasn't any other option. I think now there's so much more, so many more stories that are told from a sort of authentically queer point of view.
Yeah,
in horror, specifically.
Yeah, and I saw the documentary on Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And it was speaking of which, it was great to see Mark Patton again, as I had talked about before. Yeah. Did you write the character with him in mind?
I did, yeah. I'd seen Scream Queen also.
Yes.
And 100% was like, this is rich. Like that's, he was the starting point for that character for sure.
Yeah. I haven't seen him in anything in a really long time. Has he not been acting for a while? Because I mean, he just was storming out of the gate there in your movie. I was like, whoa, because he packed a real punch.
This is kind of his return to form. He does the horror circuits a lot and does a lot of.
I see him at like Monster Palooza and Texas Frightmare.
Yeah, he does all of that, and recently in the last couple of years, he's been doing a lot more, which has been super exciting. As a fan from being a kid, I'm happy to watch him whenever I can.
Yeah. That's really, really cool. So going back to basically pulling a crew together yourself, having a stripped down crew compared to what you're likely used to at this point, what were some of the benefits? I mean, I'm sure there's a number of drawbacks, but what were some of the benefits of working with a smaller stripped down crew? Because you were a crew of like how many?
Like 8.
8. Okay. Yeah. So what were some of the benefits of working that way?
I mean, there's like the super like easy, like less mouths to feed, less, beds that you were required, less vehicles to transport. I mean, all that stuff is kind of basic, but it also, it really felt like because we were such a tight group and we were such a small group, it really felt like, we were in this together in a way. And, there was sort of, like, I mean, indie films often, you never really go home at night and turn it off. But like this, we were, in the middle of the woods and, almost camping together. I mean, we stayed in this bear hunting camp where we slept in bunk beds and, had, porta potties for our, there was no flushing toilets. And, it was kind of intense. But the benefits is everyone was aware of what type of project it was from the beginning. And so they were 100% on board to be there for the film. And that's kind of priceless. Like that's, if you can get a crew like that, then, you're golden. And also like, Eric Naj, who is my editor and sound designer, like, normally, your editor wouldn't come and be on set, but he came and acted as a script supervisor.
Oh, that's great.
So, I mean, he had never script supervised before, but like editor / script supervisor is like possibly like the most ingenious combination ever because, he can kind of say, oh, get this coverage or what about this shot or we might need this later. And, he's made the notes. And so he's super familiar with everything from the beginning.
And he's probably editing it in his head as you're shooting.
Yeah. And I mean, we didn't have dailies. We didn't have playback. We didn't have, we didn't have any of that. So having that extra brain, watching and paying attention to what we were getting and what we might need to get was kind of great.
Yeah. No, it's really smart. I'm hearing from more and more people that they're having their editors on set, but giving them an actual role in addition to being an editor in production, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But, I think script supervisor is the perfect on-set role. I mean, it's a very specific, like there's like a traditional way to do it, but if you're able to let go of, how it's supposed to be, how a script supervisor is supposed to act, then, an editor is a great script supervisor.
Yeah. 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 It's funny that you mentioned the Addams family because they are such a force to be reckoned with.
Well, they've got a film that they just finished that's going to premiering somewhere, and I think that they've already shot and done another one. Like I met them at we were at a festival together, and like that was the highlight of that festival was getting to hang out with the two of them for the.
They're so fucking cool, and their kids. Yeah. But that ethic of filmmaking, I think, is so interesting and impressive. And their movies are unlike anything you've ever seen. They're very much their own aesthetic. And I feel like if you're doing it all yourself, you have complete control. And you can turn around things that are very unique because you don't have 15 people fucking with it, as you're making it.
Yep. Yeah. And that's another benefit of doing it like this. It's like, there was no one to turn in the script to get notes from. There was no one, no executives that we had to show the cuts to. There was no, like, it was 100%, from beginning to end, a project that like, mean, of course I looked for feedback from, from people that I trusted,
Yeah.
but it wasn't because of, a need to satisfy any, any sort of predetermined, ideas of what the film was supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Which must have been a real breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
So once the film was made, what were your next steps in getting it out and getting it distributed and all of that?
So we shot in the summer, and then went kind of went right into the editing room and edited through the fall with an eye to try to get it for like the fall winter festivals, to make those deadlines, which we ended up not doing any of those, and taking a little longer to edit it. Because it was a project that, like, no one was getting paid a lot of money. So it wasn't like we could, take forever and just work endlessly. So we got it to a point that it was the cut that we were going to submit. And then it just became about, submitting to festivals and working on the score and the sort of the traditional, it was all the same steps, but it was just the fact that it was like basically two of us doing it rather than, a larger team.
Yeah.
And then once we started doing festivals, that kind of snowballed, and it was like, once, a couple of, of the big genre festivals screened, then it just became, kind of like a snowball effect where we ended up playing at a ton of great festivals, which, knowing that like from the beginning, I never really imagined that it would be a theatrical release. Like I always kind of knew that it would probably be a VOD sort of situation. And so like, I knew that the festival route was going to be a super important, way for me to get the film out there, but also to experience it with an actual live audience. And then it might be like the only chance I get to see it with a live audience.
Did that influence the editing at all? Seeing it with live audiences, were you kind of screen testing it to a certain degree, or were you locked by the time you were at Overlook?
We were locked. I mean, if something had failed miserably, I think we would have maybe, gone back in, but like we kind of didn't even have that option. Like we had, we shared the cut early on with people and, to get notes, but like by the time that we were at Overlook, like that was locked. And, it was final color, it was final VFX, it was final score. Like we were ready to go.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about the bug design. Like what was the process like in working with the bugs? What were the frames of reference? I know obviously they were based on the design in Bug Crush, which was your first short.
Yeah.
Yep. Your first short. But what was the overall design process like? What were some of the references and how did you arrive at what you have? Because I love that you did it practically. I think that was huge.
Well, that all came from me being at the Overlook Film Festival like a couple of years before, and I had gone down there just to see movies, like just as a horror fan, and like I didn't know anybody at the festival. I didn't so I just like kind of spent the weekend alone watching movies, and I kind of with the closing night party, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go. Like I don't know anybody here, but I'm gonna go. And I went, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna talk to someone. I'm gonna talk to that guy right there. He's alone. Like he looks friendly. And it ended up being Dan Martin. And, we spent the night talking and hitting it off. And he's, of course, like this incredible special effects designer who has, worked on everything from, Color Out of Space to Possessor to amazing things. And so when I had this script ready to go, I emailed him. I was like, I've got a film, but it's, it's really small. And, I sent it to him and he was like, I'm in. I'll totally do, we can make this work. Like I won't be able to be on set to work these things. I'll make it, I'll send it to you, and then we'll do a Zoom to teach you how to, do animatronics.
So you had to do puppeteering on set.
Oh yeah. That was like, there was we did a quick little Zoom, like a crash course. And like none of us had done it before. And, and each of the bugs, has two controls per bug to, to sort of the tension of back and forth. So, if you have a shot with 3 bugs in it or 4 bugs in it, that requires 8 hands, and like that's half our crew.
Yeah.
So it was like, there was one person holding the camera, and basically everybody else was on the floor underneath, or under whatever it was, like puppeteering these things.
Right. There was that's not in my job description on that set.
Oh no, there was none of that. I mean, everyone wore multiple hats.
Now, the spirit of that, I think, is so wonderful, and you don't hear about it as much anymore. And like, by no means am I endorsing overworking your crew or being unfair, but then there's movies where it's like it all depends on everybody coming together, going into extra innings, going into overtime.
Yeah.
In some cases, not sleeping, but it doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like we're all on a mission together. And I feel like it's really hard to reach that razor's edge, of getting people excited about doing things where they overwork themselves and they go outside of the bounds of, what their job description is or whatever the case may be. But I feel like it takes a certain type of leader to inspire that in people. So, I mean, what was it like essentially creating that sort of community? Because I feel like it's a very, very much a communal vibe, that spirit of filmmaking.
Yeah. Well, it was, when I was pulling the crew together, I made sure that everybody kind of understood what type of film it was. Like, there wasn't going to be a trailer. There wasn't going to be a toilet that flushed. There was, it was all very much like, okay, this, we're going to be sleeping multiple people to a room. Like, anyone who's not willing to carry in cases of water, down a path to get to the cabin, like, if you are sort of not up for pitching in that way, then this might not be the right film to work on.
Yeah.
But the thing about working those hours and that kind of, environment is also like, we shot in 15 days. And so it's not like you're asking people to, to do this for months on end.
Right.
It's a short, sharp little like burst of dedication that you're asking from people. And part of shooting in Maine, part of what was great about that and working with largely like a Maine-based crew, like our sound guy and our DP and they were all Maine-based. And so there's not a whole lot of feature films that come through Maine. There's commercials and there's some short form stuff, but the chance to actually do a feature film, that doesn't come along every single day. So I found that people were pretty excited. I mean, of course, like the reality of it, once you are on set and it is as difficult as it is, I mean, there are certainly times when everyone is grumbling.
Yeah.
But that's kind of unavoidable, I feel like.
Yeah, I think every set, that's going to happen to a certain degree. So it was all local Maine crew for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, Eric, the editor, came in from New York as a supervisor. Like I said, the cast, wasn't local. They were all, I mean, the 4 leads, they all came in. But everybody else, all of the other actors, all of the, it was basically like we had a DP, we had one sort of AC, gaffer, grip, electric, and B-cam operator, one guy that did all that. I had actually a friend from LA come in who he did wardrobe, but he also did hair and makeup, bug puppeteering. He was Mark Patton's stunt double. So everybody kind of did everything.
Yeah.
My boyfriend came from New York who had, not worked on a film set before and became executive producer.
All right.
And stepped up and kind of, everybody kind of figured out what needed to be done and made it happen, which was kind of exciting.
Your first film. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So there's scenes that are really, really visceral and like really squirm inducing. And I feel like it's so easy to try to do that and to make things that are really visceral, but to actually have that physiological reaction, I think takes a certain level of craftsmanship. So what was the approach to crafting some of those really gross, visceral, effective body horror sequences?
Yeah. I feel like, in this specific movie, it was, I feel like it works as well as it does, hopefully, because you realize what's going to happen before it happens. Mm-hmm. And then you're given like a big chunk of time when it's going to happen and you're dreading it. And, once she says like, we have to get them out right now, like it becomes like, oh, okay, that's what's going to happen. And then like your mind starts racing and you're thinking, well, how are they going to get them out? And like, oh, that's how they're going to get them out. Like, and so you're sort of given this lead time to
digest,
digest, so to speak, like what's about to happen. And then it starts happening and then it doesn't, we don't cut away. And it happens in real time, in a way that you might not expect it to. It's not so graphic. Like you don't actually see as much as it probably feels like you might see, but the time that it takes and the sort of the sound design and the sort of, how it unfolds is excruciating, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I thought it was super, super duper effective in that regard.
I mean, because also everyone can imagine like what that might be like, and it's just not pleasant.
No.
Like, I think that everyone can kind of put themselves in the position of those characters and imagine how horrific that might be.
Yeah, definitely. It evokes a lot of physiological empathy. So what was your cinema diet like approaching this movie? Did you go watch a bunch of Cronenbergs? Like what kind of got you tonally prepared for this movie, if anything?
It wasn't so much tonally stuff that I was looking for tone. It was more stuff that I was looking at for like, the sort of the micro budget ethos of like filmmaking at a scale with, like the Addams Family or like, so it's like Hellbender or it's, I watched a lot of the sort of the mumble gore films, like, Sun Don't Shine and, A Horrible Way to Die. And a lot of the sort of those like super small indie horror films that had been done with, tiny little crews of friends that had gotten together. So that stuff was the stuff that I was watching more than anything tonally. Cause I was kind of, having come off writing the script, I was sort of, I was confident that I had on the page what I needed the story to be, and I just kind of needed the affirmation, I guess, that it could be done in this way that I was thinking about doing it, because I hadn't made a film like this before. I hadn't worked at such a small scale. Even my first film, Bug Crush, like the crew on that was bigger than it was on Swallowed.
Wow.
It cost more to make Bug Crush than it did to make Swallowed.
Oh, holy shit.
Like, yeah, like there's so I hadn't done it before and I knew it could be done. I just didn't fully know if I could do it. And so it was a challenge to myself as much as anything, I think.
I feel like it's such a good exercise. As you said, this was a sort of an experiment, but I feel like it's such a good exercise to do, especially having done significantly higher budgeted movies, to then come back. It's like, okay, rubber meets the road. How good am I? Can I execute something on a really, really low budget? Because, I mean, I feel like a real misunderstanding of what directing is they think it's like you come up with the shots and the ideas and the concepts and you just create. And I'm sure you can attest to the fact that it's at least 90% not creating, but coordinating and making things happen, and being resourceful and problem solving. Yeah. Were there any,
and it's,
sorry.
I was going to say, and it's the type of problems that you're solving are, inherently different on a movie like Swallowed than a movie like The Ruins. I mean, because a lot of times on bigger projects, you're solving like, oh, well, we can't put base camp there, and then it's going to take 15, a fleet of 15 passenger vans to get people from here to there, and like it's just a different set of problems.
Yeah. Were there any? I feel like it's so important to watch movies that have been done at a low, super duper low budget, just to see what's possible. You'd mentioned a few of them, obviously Hellbender, other stuff that the Addams Family had done before, Sun Don't Shine. Were there any real, like, fundamental, inspiring, super low budget watches that really gave you a sense of what was possible?
I mean, so Sun Don't Shine, Always Shine. Also, there's this movie called Toad Road, which I have always loved, and it's like a weird little, almost found footage type thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I just put together a list actually, for someone Are We Not Cats? I like was kind of great and like weirdly inspiring. The Deeper You Dig was
I
something
love
that I
that
watched.
one, man. That was
like,
so
Blue
disturbing.
Ruin, of course.
Oh yeah,
Is amazing. She Dies Tomorrow. Pyewacket.
yeah. I saw that one. That was excellent. I love Pyewacket.
Yeah, I mean, it's so like those types of films,
Yeah.
which are, it's a very specific kind of, contained story world that most of them exist in.
Yeah. Well, when you're approaching something with that budget, what are the most important elements? Because I just read the Duplass brothers wrote a book recently called Like Brothers, which is one of the best filmmaking books I've read. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I listened to it on tape.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's is it the two brothers doing it, like narrating? Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Oh man, I should do that. I should listen to that just to reinforce it. But no, it's a wonderfully charming read. But I think the one thing that they talked about with their budgets, which were super low, is we're going to focus on story and character. But in your case, in your experience, what were some of the things that you really had to get right? Because you have to be so economical when you're on a low budget. But what are the things to invest in, whether it's time, energy, money, whatever?
Yeah. I mean, actors are, I think that character is at the heart of all of it, because if you have characters in your film that the audience doesn't care about and they're not invested in what happens to them, then, it doesn't matter what the rest of your film is like. And actors that bring those characters to life in a way that is like complicated and kind of sticky and, like that kind of, involves the viewer draws them into the sort of internal world of the character like that. The casting is you can put two great actors in a empty room and get something amazing, and you can have the most beautiful, expensive location in the world, and if the actors that you have in the scene aren't great, then like it's all kind of wasted. One of the things that I did on this, which I found really helpful, and it's like a weird little detail, but like I knew that we would be shooting about 6 pages a day.
Okay.
And so in writing the script, I made sure that all of the scenes were like, I knew that I wouldn't be able to afford like a location change in the middle of a shoot day. So I made sure that there weren't any scenes that were shorter than 6 pages.
Oh,
so like
smart.
if we were at the club for 1 day of shooting, then it was either a 6-page scene or it was a 12-page scene, and we would be there for 2 days. Like, breaking it up that way, because I knew that we weren't going to be able to split any of our days and be at more than one location. Yeah, and that was super helpful when it came time to like scheduling film, because we didn't have an AD, we didn't have anyone doing that really. So I mean, other than myself and Ross, one of the producers, but like that built in to the script made it super easy to schedule.
That's very smart. Yeah, I feel like a big point of resistance for a lot of would-be or first-time filmmakers is they feel like the story and the script comes first. In other words, not putting these guardrails around it, not having the technicalities up front that you basically write the script around. I feel like if you're not doing that and you're working on a budget, you're doing it wrong. Roger Corman has a lot to say on the topic. Wonderful book about it.
Yeah.
But basically, like, you basically have to reverse engineer based on, logistical elements of what you can do, what you can't do, and stuff like that. So I think that's
there's something
smart.
really like liberating about those guardrails of like knowing, okay, like this page is, this scene has to be 6 pages at least, or these are the locations that I have, and I have to work within these restrictions. And that in a lot of ways is a lot harder to do than when you don't have anything, but it's also, when you get it right, it can be a lot more rewarding, and, it can work really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Which again, it's so paradoxical, because you'd think if you had infinite options, but it's the paradox of choice. Like the more choices you have, the more you like overanalyze. Our little monkey brains can't process all of those options. Yeah.
And there's no way that I probably would have made, I say it's like a first film, but like if it really had been my first film, I don't think that I would have understood the those parameters at that point, having only made a short film before. Like, it's
Right.
only because I have done those other films that I sort of understood the way that a shoot goes, that I was able to like sort of proactively plan for some of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was an experiment and exercise that paid off. I mean, it was a really, really great and super unique horror movie. And it feels really personal too. It feels like it's got your very personal touch, which I think is a real benefit for just financing it yourself, doing it all yourself. And
that's it. If you finance it yourself and it doesn't feel personal, then there's a problem.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So you, when we were talking before we hit record, you were talking about how you found yourself at a point where you had to create something, and in your case, you cathartically, basically stress cooked, as you said, cooked a bunch of meals, and you knew you were going to feed it to your crew eventually, but you had to take some sort of action towards this movie, which I think is interesting. What happened there?
Yeah, it was that sort of point when it was like, are we going to get the financing? Are we not going to get financing? Like, it felt completely out of my control because I hadn't committed to financing it myself yet. And the one thing that I found, like, I wanted to have control over something, and so I just kind of stress cooked and made meals and meals and meals and just froze everything, knowing that it was going to making stuff that could get put into the slow cooker later on set to feed the crew, because it felt like, okay, I'm actively doing something to help bring this movie to life by making this, like, chicken stew or whatever it was. It was kind of great. Like, I found it and it was kind of appreciated. Like, when we were on set, okay, at the end of 15 days, we were all sick of slow cooker meals that I had made. But like, the fact that it wasn't just pizza and like trashy food all the time was kind of, it was good. I think
the personal touch
a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I bet it felt really satisfying that you took some action towards the movie that actually was effective and useful later down the line. Because I feel like when you're waiting for the money to come in, there's just this antsiness, that artists urge to do or make, or just fucking, I need to go. But that sounds like, instead of smoking a pack of cigarettes, sounds like that was a really positive outlet.
Yeah, it was a much better reaction to that, like, anxiety.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I feel like for creatives of any kind, I find cooking to be really fun and satisfying. Not all the time. It's very time consuming, I find, unless you're cooking something super simple. But no, there is something, especially if you're creatively stuck in any regard, the idea of you get a bunch of ingredients, you artfully put it together, you cook it, you consume it, and then it's done all in the same night. Your idea comes into the third dimension and gets consumed
through execution. Yeah, which is like so not what happens normally in film. There's something so satisfying about, like, seeing something the whole way through, even if you are just throwing it in the freezer.
Right. All on a condensed timeline. No, it feels just like a good counter hobby for filmmakers who are frustrated by how long things take. It's like that creative urge, you purge it and you get to consume what you created that very night, which was definitely satisfying. Well, Carter, huge congrats on the movie. Glad we're able to do this again. What's next for you, by the way?
After I just finished another project with Blumhouse.
Very nice.
Called The Passenger, which is a sort of coming of age hostage road trip thriller.
Ooh, all right.
With Kyle Gallner and Johnny Birchtold. That will be coming out later this fall, I think.
Oh, nice. And that's shot.
Yeah. We shot that in New Orleans, actually, like, as part of their they do these series of streaming movies that are sort of straddle the line between television and film. Like, each is a standalone film.
Yep.
But it sort of is done with a television model where, the crew and a lot of the production services are in place, and then they just rotate in, a different feature length script and director. Yeah.
That's smart. Yeah, I was wondering how they're able to put so many. Like, Blumhouse is putting out so many movies right now. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, they do, like, they'll do a deal for, like, 8 pictures, and they'll get the core crew in New Orleans, the production managers and the production designers and all the all the key department heads, and then they'll just they keep that crew, and then they just there's usually 2 crews, and then while one is sort of finishing up the next one is prepping, and you just, it's like a fast moving train, and they just rotate in and out, and they're all shot in New Orleans, and they're all completely different standalone films, but they take advantage of a lot of the same people behind the scenes.
It's smart. It's a good economy of scale. Plus, those people get working relationship with each other, and shorthand. Yep. I feel like
it can lead a little bit to coming in as the director, as coming in as the outsider, and these people have already made 8 films together,
right?
Like that can be a hurdle to get over, but like once you're over that, it's kind of great because that they do have that shorthand of working with each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, congrats again on the movie. Where should we look out for it?
You can find it. It's on VOD streaming, like wherever you rent or buy movies, from the Amazons and the iTunes to the Google Plays and all of those places.
Okay, great. All right. Well, Carter, pleasure as always. Before we wrap up, any parting wisdom for those aspiring filmmakers out there?
Just make the movie. Like, if this isn't the case scenario for, writing something that to make yourself, that it's 100% worth it. Like, don't wait around for someone else to give you permission to make the films that you want to make.
Very wise words. All right. Thanks again. All right. Here are some key takeaways from this conversation with Carter Smith. Number 1, write what you can make on your own. This is a recurring theme in these interviews. As both Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Smith did with their first movies, Carter took an inventory of everything he had access to and then built his script around that. This included a white van and a hunting lodge, both of which prominently appeared in the movie. It's easy to write beyond your budget, but it's still important to maximize production value. Everyone typically has access to something unique that can boost production value. A house, property, a friend with a boat, etc. Figure out yours and write your script around that. Number 2, make your second first film. Common advice or direction in the film industry has a lot of directors always trying to substantially increase their budget with every subsequent movie. You absolutely should if you can, and it's what agents advise, but it can be creatively limiting and leave you in a desert for years where you're making nothing. If you have a movie under your belt, doing one at a lower budget is not a step backwards, so it shouldn't be for your ego or your agent's ego. Carter has done movies for Paramount and Blumhouse, but was itching for a project and really connected to Swallowed, so he went all in with his own money. It's ballsy for sure, but it's what directors do. Number 3, write with the budget in mind. With his budget so low, Carter figured out early on that he and his crew could shoot at a clip of about 6 pages per day, so he structured his script entirely around this shooting schedule and made sure that each scene only lasted 6 or 12 pages so he could maximize locations and minimize company moves. As much as it may feel like you're stifling creativity, putting these guardrails in early in your creative process can save a substantial amount of budget, and as Carter said, can actually be creatively liberating since limitations force creativity. Anyway, guys, thanks as always for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with your friends and family on social media? Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor, that's I am Nick Taylor, and on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to The Nick Taylor Horror Show. Hey guys, one last thing before you head off, and this is The Howl. How would you like a monthly newsletter featuring a recap of the latest horror news, my personal movie recommendations, updates from the show, and cool stuff I've recently discovered? If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, sign up for my monthly email newsletter, The Howl, today. You can sign up for The Howl by visiting nicktaylor.com/thehowl. That's nicktaylor.com/thehowl.